The inheritance notice. Marcus Webb was scrubbing the third-floor men's bathroom at the Riverside office complex when his life changed forever. He had exactly 47 minutes left on his night shift, a broken mop handle he'd been meaning to replace for 3 weeks, and absolutely no idea that he was technically the ruler of 17 star systems. The notification came through on his old tablet, the one he used for audiobooks during his lunch breaks. At first, Marcus thought it was spam. The message header read, "Urgent, Imperial succession requires immediate attention." Below that, informal script that his tablet's translator struggled with, was a wall of text that mentioned bloodlines, ancient treaties, and something called the Viridian Throne. Marcus deleted it and went back to scrubbing. The second message arrived 10 minutes later, this time with a video attachment. Against his better judgment, it was a slow night, and curiosity was a powerful thing. Marcus opened it. A woman's face filled the screen. She had silver skin that seemed to shimmer in the light, eyes like polished obsidian, and an expression of barely contained panic. She was beautiful in an otherworldly way that made Marcus immediately suspicious this was some kind of elaborate scam. "Marcus Webb of Earth," she said, her voice crisp with what sounded like a British accent filtered through something distinctly non-human. "My name is Kalara Vex, Prime Administrator of the Viridian Empire. I apologize for the informal method of contact, but circumstances are desperate. Your great-grandfather was Theron Castellan, 4th Prince of Veritas. Upon his death 6 months ago, the imperial succession passed to you. You are, as of this moment, Emperor of the Viridian Systems." Marcus stared at the screen. Then he checked the date. It wasn't April 1st. "I understand this is shocking," Kalara continued. "Your great-grandfather fled to Earth in 2187 after a political disagreement. He severed all ties with the Empire and lived out his life as a," she consulted something off-screen, "as a construction worker. He never told his family of his origins. The Empire respected his wishes and left him in peace. However, Viridian law is absolute. Upon the death of Emperor Theron's elder brothers without heirs, the succession has passed through his line. To you." She leaned closer to the camera, and Marcus could see the exhaustion in her eyes. "Mr. Webb, the Empire is in crisis. Without a confirmed emperor, our government has frozen. Wars are brewing on our borders. Economic collapse is imminent. I need you to come to Veritas immediately and accept the throne. Even if you abdicate afterward, we need someone to restart the system. Please. Millions of lives depend on it." The video ended. Marcus sat on the bathroom floor, mop forgotten, and tried to process what he'd just heard. He was 32 years old. He'd dropped out of community college twice. He lived in a studio apartment with a radiator that only worked on Tuesdays. His greatest recent accomplishment was figuring out which cleaning solution worked best on the mysterious stains in the break room. He was not Emperor material. His tablet buzzed again. Another message, this time with an attached file labeled DNA verification and a set of coordinates. At the bottom was a single line, "A ship will arrive at these coordinates in 3 hours. Please be there. Humanity's first contact with the wider galaxy depends on this remaining quiet until you're safely off-world. Kilovolt." Marcus looked at the coordinates. They pointed to an abandoned lot 3 blocks from his apartment. He should have deleted the messages. He should have finished his shift, gone home, and forgotten this ever happened. But Marcus had spent his entire life being invisible, to his teachers, to his ex-girlfriend, to the people who walked past him every day without seeing the man holding the mop. Someone was asking him to be important. To matter. Even if it was insane. Even if it was probably a scam. Marcus Webb clocked out early for the first time in 5 years. The abandoned lot. The lot was exactly as depressing as Marcus remembered, cracked concrete, weeds pushing through broken asphalt, and a shopping cart that had been there so long it qualified as architecture. He stood in the center, feeling ridiculous, checking his phone every 30 seconds. At 3:47 a.m. exactly, the air above him rippled. It wasn't dramatic. There were no special effects, no bright lights or loud sounds. The space simply folded in a way that made Marcus's eyes hurt, and suddenly there was a ship where there hadn't been one before. It was small, about the size of a delivery van, and looked like someone had designed a sports car and then added whatever the spaceship equivalent of racing stripes was. A hatch opened in the side, and Clara Vex stepped out. She was shorter than he'd expected, maybe 5'6", and she wore what looked like a business suit made from liquid mercury. Up close, he could see that her silver skin wasn't makeup, it was actually metallic, catching the streetlight in ways that human skin never could. "Mr. Webb," she said, and her relief was visible. "Thank God. I was afraid you wouldn't come." "I'm still not sure I should have," Marcus admitted. "This is insane. You realize that, right?" "Completely." She gestured to the ship. "But it's also true. I can prove everything once we're aboard. The journey to Veritas will take 3 days with this ship. That gives us time to brief you on Imperial protocol, basic Viridian history, and the current political situation." Marcus didn't move. "What if I say no? What if I just walk away?" Clara was quiet for a moment. "Then I return to Veritas and watch my people descend into civil war. 3 factions are already positioning for power. Without an emperor to check their authority, they'll tear the empire apart." She met his eyes. "But I won't force you. Your great-grandfather chose Earth because he valued freedom above everything else. I'll respect that, even if it costs me everything." There was something in her voice, exhaustion, desperation, but also absolute sincerity. Marcus had cleaned office buildings for 10 years. He'd learned to read people by the messes they left behind, the way they treated the invisible staff, the small cruelties and kindnesses that revealed character. Clara Vex might be an alien, but her desperation was real. 3 days, Marcus said. "You've got 3 days to convince me this isn't the worst decision I've ever made." The crash course. The interior of the ship was surprisingly normal. Seats that looked like they belonged in a private jet, storage compartments, and a cockpit that was less Star Trek and more really expensive airplane. Clara took the pilot's seat and began pressing controls that made the ship hum with power. "Stealth mode engaged," she said. "We'll be in orbit within 10 minutes. Earth's detection systems won't register us." "You've done this before," Marcus observed. "I've been visiting Earth for 3 years, preparing for this moment. I knew succession would eventually reach your family line. I'd hoped to have more time to prepare you." She glanced back at him. Fate, it seems, had other plans. As the ship lifted, smoothly, quietly, without any of the drama Marcus had expected, Clara began his education. The Viridian Empire, she explained, was old. Ancient, by human standards. It had been founded over 4,000 years ago when 3 species, the Viridians, the Keth, and the Morganites, had united to stop a war that threatened to destroy them all. They'd created a government based on checks and balances so complex it made human democracy look simple. At the center of it all was the emperor. Not a dictator, the emperor had surprisingly little direct power, but a keystone. A person whose genetic signature was coded into every major system. Without an emperor, the government simply stopped working. Banks froze. Courts couldn't render verdicts. Military command structures locked down. "It's designed to prevent coups," Clara explained. "If someone murders the emperor, they don't gain power, they break the entire system. The only way forward is through legitimate succession." "And legitimate succession led to a human janitor," Marcus said dryly. "Led to the great-grandson of a prince who valued principle over power." She smiled slightly. "Your great-grandfather could have been emperor. He chose exile instead because he disagreed with a war the empire was planning. That war, by the way, was later recognized as his brother's greatest mistake. Theron was right, and he gave up everything to stand by his convictions." Marcus was quiet, thinking about the grandfather he'd never known, the man who'd worked construction, raised a family in a 2-bedroom house in Ohio, and apparently never once mentioned he was alien royalty. What was he like? Calera asked. Did you know him? He died before I was born. But my dad talked about him sometimes. Marcus smiled, remembering. Said he was stubborn. Refused to cut corners on any job. Would stand up to anyone if he thought they were wrong, even if it cost him. He paused. Dad always said Grandpa Theron acted like he was royalty, but he meant it as a joke. Perhaps, Calera said softly, it was less of a joke than he knew. The ship broke through Earth's atmosphere, and through the viewport, Marcus watched his planet fall away. He'd never left the city where he was born. Now he was leaving his entire world behind, chasing after the ghost of a great-grandfather who'd done the same thing in reverse. Tell me about the crisis, Marcus said. The real situation. Not the diplomatic version. Calera's expression hardened. 3 high counselors are positioning for control. Counselor Drex of the Keth believes military strength should govern. He's rallied the defense forces and is preparing for what he calls necessary intervention in the border systems. Counselor Yara of the Morganites thinks economic power should rule. She's freezing assets and withholding resources to force compliance. And Counselor Terran, she grimaced, Terran is human, actually. From the Diplomat Corps. He believes humans should lead the next era of the Empire. There are other humans in the Empire? About 40,000, scattered across various worlds. Most are diplomats, researchers, traders. Your great-grandfather wasn't the only human to leave Earth, just the only one who was royalty. She adjusted their course slightly. Terran is dangerous because he's not wrong about everything. Humans have proven adaptable, creative, and skilled at diplomacy. But his methods, forcing human cultural standards on non-human worlds, dismissing alien traditions as primitive, are causing resentment. So I'm walking into a powder keg. Yes. And you think a janitor from Earth can stop it from exploding? Calera turned to face him fully. Mr. Webb, Marcus, I don't think you understand what you represent. You're not just some random human. You're proof that Theron's line survived. You're the legitimate heir, and that means something in our culture. You could reset everything. Force all 3 counselors back to their corners. Give us time to rebuild properly. And then what? I go back to Earth and pretend this never happened? If that's what you want. She held his gaze. But I hope you'll consider staying. Even if only for a while. We could use someone who understands what it's like to be overlooked. The Empire has forgotten how to see the people it claims to serve. Marcus thought about his job. About his apartment. About the life he'd built that didn't really mean anything to anyone. 3 days, he said again. Convince me. Calera smiled. Challenge accepted, Your Imperial Majesty. Don't call me that. Not yet, she agreed. But soon. Outside the viewport, stars stretched into lines as the ship engaged its faster-than-light drive, and Marcus Webb left humanity behind. The Imperial Palace. Derridus looked nothing like Marcus expected. He'd imagined gleaming towers and flying cars, the usual science fiction aesthetic. Instead, the capital city looked like someone had taken ancient Rome, medieval Japan, and modern Singapore and blended them into something that somehow worked. The Imperial Palace sat at the city's heart, a massive structure of white stone and living crystal that seemed to grow from the ground rather than being built upon it. Calera landed the ship in a private hangar, and as Marcus stepped out, he was immediately surrounded by guards in armor that looked ceremonial until you noticed the energy weapons built into the gauntlets. Your Imperial Majesty, said the guard captain, a towering Keth with 4 arms and skin like polished jade. He bowed deeply. We are honored by your return. I'm not, Marcus started, but Calera's hand on his arm stopped him. Let them have this moment, she whispered. They've been waiting 6 months for an emperor. Let them believe. So Marcus nodded awkwardly and followed Calera through corridors that seemed designed to make visitors feel insignificant. Everywhere he looked, there were reminders of the Empire's age, murals depicting ancient battles, statues of previous emperors, display cases containing artifacts that predated human civilization. This is the throne room, Calera said, pushing open doors that must have weighed several tons but swung silently on their hinges. The room was enormous. The ceiling disappeared into shadows above, and the walls were lined with seats, thousands of them, Marcus realized. This wasn't just a throne room. It was an arena. At the center, raised on a platform, sat a chair that looked disappointingly normal. Just stone, simple and unadorned, with a small handprint carved into each armrest. That's it? Marcus asked. That's it. Calera walked toward the throne, and Marcus followed. The seat of unity. When you place your hands on those prints, your genetic signature will unlock every system in the empire. Banks will reopen. Courts will resume. The military command structure will recognize authority again. She turned to face him. But it's permanent. Once you activate it, you can't undo it. You'll be emperor until you die or formally abdicate to a recognized heir. What if I just leave? Get back on the ship and go home? Then the empire tears itself apart. Drex launches his military intervention. Yara creates economic chaos. Terran pushes for human supremacy. Billions of people suffer because 3 leaders are too proud to compromise. Marcus stared at the throne. 3 days ago, his biggest decision had been whether to have instant ramen or instant mac and cheese for dinner. Why me? He asked. There must be someone better suited for this. Someone who actually knows what they're doing. Because you're legitimate, Calera said patiently. And because, she hesitated. Because your great-grandfather was the best emperor we never had. Theron understood that power should serve people, not control them. He walked away from the throne rather than compromise that principle. You're his legacy. You carry that same choice. Before Marcus could respond, the throne room doors slammed open. 3 figures entered, each flanked by their own entourage. Marcus didn't need introductions to know these were the High Counselors. Counselor Drex was massive, 7 feet of scaled muscle and barely contained aggression. Counselor Yara moved like liquid mercury, her form shifting subtly as she walked. And Counselor Terran was human, middle-aged, with the kind of confident smile that politicians wore when they thought they'd already won. So, Drex growled, his voice like grinding stone, this is Theron's heir. A human. A weak, soft human who knows nothing of our ways. He's legitimate, Calera said firmly. His bloodline is verified. The succession is legal. Legal, Yara's voice was musical, hypnotic. But is it wise? The Empire stands at a crossroads. We need strength, not sentiment. Terran stepped forward, still smiling. Marcus Webb. I've read your file. Fascinating life, truly the human dream of humble origins. But between us, he switched to English, you're in over your head. The smart play is to activate the throne, legitimize the succession, and then work with me to transition power properly. Humans understanding humans, yes? Marcus felt something click in his mind. The way Terran said humans understanding humans while the alien counselors watched, excluded from the conversation. The casual dismissal of their entire culture as something to be transitioned away from. This was the powder keg Calera had mentioned. I need time, Marcus said, also in English, and Terran's smile widened. This is a lot to process. Of course, of course. Take all the time you need. Terran nodded to the other counselors. We should let His Imperial Majesty rest. It's been a long journey. After they left, Calera exhaled slowly. That was a test, Marcus finished. They wanted to see which way I'd lean. And which way will you lean? Marcus walked to the throne, studying it. The stone was warm under his fingers, almost alive. He thought about his great-grandfather, about a man who'd given up everything because he believed some things were more important than power. Tell me about the war, he said. The one Theron opposed. Calera was quiet for a moment. The Keth had been attacked by raiders from the Outer Rim. They wanted to launch a preemptive strike against the raiders' home systems. Total war. Theron argued that would kill millions of innocents along with the raiders. He proposed targeted operations instead. His brothers overruled him. What happened? The war lasted 8 years. Killed 20 million beings. When it ended, we'd created 3 new enemy states and accomplished nothing except proving we could be as brutal as any raiders. She met his eyes. Theron's plan would have worked. It would have taken longer, cost more politically, but it would have saved most of those lives. He knew it. And he couldn't stay and watch his brothers choose expedience over morality. Marcus nodded slowly, understanding clicking into place. The decision. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. The rooms they'd given him were larger than his entire apartment building, but they felt suffocating. He found himself wandering the palace halls, learning its rhythms. At 3 a.m., he discovered the servants' quarters. They were tucked away in the lower levels, simple but clean, and the people there, a mix of species he couldn't name, looked up in alarm when he appeared. "Sorry," Marcus said quickly. I couldn't sleep. Needed to walk." An elderly Viridian woman, her silver skin faded to the color of old pewter, gestured to a seat at their table. "Sit, young emperor. Have tea." "I'm not," he stopped. "How do you know who I am?" "Everyone knows. Word travels fast below stairs." She poured him something that smelled like cinnamon and starlight. "You have the look of old Theron. I served in the palace when he was a prince." Before he left, Marcus sat. Around him, the servants returned to their midnight meal, and he realized they weren't uncomfortable with his presence, just surprised by it. "What was he like?" Marcus asked. "Stubborn," the woman said fondly. "Kind. He remembered our names. Asked about our families. When his brothers proposed cutting the palace staff's benefits to fund the war, he threatened to abdicate right there." She smiled. "He meant it, too." They backed down. A young Keth server set down a plate of something that looked like bread. "My grandmother told me stories. Said Prince Theron once helped her carry water when her back was injured." A prince, carrying water. He shook his head in wonder. Marcus sat with them for 2 hours, listening to stories about a man who'd been prince and construction worker, royal and regular person. Who'd understood that power meant responsibility, not privilege. As dawn broke over Veritas, Marcus made his decision. The activation. The throne room filled quickly. All 3 high counselors, their entourages, what seemed like half the palace staff, and delegates from every major world in the empire. Kalara stood beside the throne, trying not to look nervous. Marcus entered in the clothes he'd worn from Earth, jeans, a t-shirt, his work boots. He'd refused the ceremonial robes they'd offered. "Mr. Webb," Drex rumbled, "you cannot activate the throne dressed like a dock worker." "My great-grandfather was a construction worker," Marcus replied calmly. "If these clothes were good enough for him, they're good enough for me." He approached the throne and turned to face the assembled crowd. "I've spent 3 days learning about this empire," he said. "About its history, its laws, its current crisis. And I've made a decision." Every eye was on him. "I'll accept the throne and activate the succession. But on 3 conditions." Yara's form rippled with surprise. "Conditions?" "You cannot dictate terms to the High Council." "Actually," Kalara said quietly, "as emperor, he can do exactly that." Marcus continued. "First, Counselor Drex, your military intervention in the border systems is cancelled. Instead, you'll work with local governors to address their concerns through diplomacy. If that fails, then we consider other options. But genocide isn't policy, it's failure." Drex's scales bristled, but he said nothing. "Second, Counselor Yara, economic sanctions are to be reviewed by a committee that includes representatives from affected worlds. No more using money as a weapon. The Empire should lift people up, not hold them hostage." Yara's eyes narrowed, but she nodded slowly. "Third, Counselor Terran," Marcus switched to English, "your proposal for human cultural dominance is denied." This is a multi-species empire. We don't lead by erasing other cultures. We lead by learning from them. Terran's smile finally cracked. You're making a mistake. Humans could. Humans could learn humility, Marcus interrupted, switching back to universal standard. That's what my great-grandfather did. That's what I'm doing now. He sat on the throne and placed his hands on the armrests. The effect was immediate. Light burst from the throne, spreading through the floor, up the walls, across the ceiling. Throughout the palace, throughout the empire, systems came online. Banks unlocked. Courts received access to their databases. Military commanders found their authorization codes working again. The Viridian Empire was operational. Marcus felt it, too, a connection he couldn't quite describe, like suddenly being aware of the Empire's heartbeat. Millions of lives, hundreds of worlds, all somehow linked through this ancient system. It was terrifying. It was humbling. It was his responsibility now. The succession is complete, Calera announced, her voice carrying through the throne room. All hail Emperor Marcus, first of his name, keeper of unity, voice of the three peoples. The room erupted in sound, some cheers, some protests, but mostly relief. The crisis was over. The empire had an emperor. Marcus stood, legs shaky, and looked at the three high counselors. We have a lot of work ahead of us, he said. But we're going to do it together. No more power plays. No more brinkmanship. We're going to remember what this empire was supposed to be, a place where different peoples work together because together we're stronger than apart. Drex bowed, the gesture stiff but genuine. Yara inclined her head. Even Terran managed a nod, though his expression suggested this conversation wasn't over. As the throne room emptied, Calera approached Marcus. That was bold. That was terrifying. He looked at his hands, still tingling from contact with the throne. What have I done? What your great-grandfather would have done. Led with principle instead of power. She smiled. Welcome to the Empire, Emperor Marcus. Try not to start any wars in your first week. No promises. 6 months later. Marcus stood in the private gardens of the Imperial Palace, watching the sunset paint the sky in colors that didn't exist on Earth. His tablet, he'd kept his old one, despite offers of better technology, showed him reports from across the Empire. The border crisis had been resolved through negotiation. Drex, once you got past the grumbling, was actually a skilled diplomat. The economic reforms were working. Yara had grudgingly admitted that investing in infrastructure paid better long-term dividends than hoarding resources. And Terran had been sent to Earth as the Empire's official ambassador. Marcus figured keeping him busy with first contact protocols would be educational for everyone involved. Your Imperial Majesty, a servant approached, dinner is prepared. Thanks. I'll be right there. Marcus still wasn't used to being called Your Imperial Majesty, but he'd learned to accept it. The role came with the responsibility. His tablet buzzed with a message from his father. They'd video-called 3 times a week since Marcus took the throne. Dad still thought the whole thing was insane, but he was proud. Mom had started a scrapbook of My Son the Emperor news clippings. Marcus smiled and headed inside. He missed Earth. Missed the simplicity of his old life. But he'd learned something important over the past 6 months. Real power wasn't about control. It was about service. About using whatever influence you had to make things better for people who couldn't do it themselves. His great-grandfather had understood that. Had walked away from power because he wouldn't compromise his principles. Marcus had chosen differently. He'd accepted power because he could use it to uphold those same principles. Different paths. Same destination. As he entered the dining hall, still ridiculously large, but he'd gotten used to it, Calera looked up from her own stack of reports and smiled. Good evening, Emperor. Good evening, Prime Administrator. He sat across from her. What disasters are we solving today? Only 3. Light schedule. They both laughed, and somewhere in the vast machinery of the empire, millions of people lived their lives in peace, never knowing that their emperor had once been a janitor who'd learned to see what everyone else overlooked.